So good day and welcome to the first lecture for the propagation class. And so in today's seminar, we are going to learn the different aspects of the biology of the plant because this is going to be very important. The vocabulary that is going to be found within this seminar is going to be important as we get through the lab and begin to prune. So make a note of the different words because that's going to be the lingo that is going to make you understand what we're going to be talking about when we prune. And so we're just going to touch briefly on the biology and the anatomy of the plant. And so when we look at our plant for our purpose, we're going to find four main body parts. We're going to have a flower. Obviously, the flowers are going to be nice and pretty, and they're going to be for the reproductive component of the plant. Now, when we are pruning, that's going to be a problem for flowers because often when you are pruning or when you prune a plant, you may be sacrificing flowers or color. And that is something that you need to be aware because the time when you prune plants will have an influence as to the amount of flowers that you are going to get. And if the flowers are then followed by the fruit, or if you, the plant that you're growing, you desire to have the fruit, then sacrificing the flowers will also sacrifice the fruit. So be aware that pruning can have a negative impact on the flower and the fruit of the plant. But they're going to be there, and we're going to have to work around them, or work with them, or work against them. And then you're going to have the stem. The stem of the plant will actually give rise to the leaves. It'll give rise to the flowers. It's also going to make the plant grow. In most cases, that is where we're going to be cutting. We may cut the stem to bring the plant down in size or to confine it into its space. And we're also going to be selecting different types of stems depending on where they're located to shape the plant. So most of the pruning will be done through the stems. And then we're going to have the leaves. The leaves are going to have a very important function, and that is going to be through photosynthesis. And we're going to explain that later on. And then attaching the plant to the ground are going to be the roots. For our purpose, we are not going to do any kind of root pruning. There will be instances where root pruning may be required, such as container plants that are overgrown or root bound, where you will have to cut the roots to kind of put them in new media and get them growing again. Or in worst case scenarios, when a sidewalk needs to be repaired because the tree has broken it, they will do some root pruning to the tree in order to kind of keep it confined to its space. It's usually not the case for our purpose because most of the things that we're going to be pruning are going to be the shrubs. So those are going to be the four main uh, parts of the plant that we're going to look at them in a lot more detail. This is a very simplistic drawing of a plant. This is a little bit more advanced. And so, once again, I will ask that you kind of become familiar with many or most of these words because we are going to be looking at them. Not every single one, but most of them. So we have the terminal bud or the topmost bud, sometimes referred to as the apical. We'll explain that in a lot more detail because that is going to be the main site of growth from the plant. And so as the apical bud gets getting higher and higher and higher, it's going to leave behind a stem. A stem that at some point, the stem is going to have very important components. It's going to have an axillary bud, or sometimes referred to as a lateral bud, and that bud is going to be associated with a leaf. The area where the axillary bud and the leaves are attached to the stem is known as a node, and that is very important for you to know and be able to determine where the nodes are within a plant. So the axillary bud is going to be dormant because it's going to be very common for the terminal or the apical bud to have a dominance. It wants to be the topmost bud. It wants to be the leader. And so it's going to secrete a hormone that is going to keep the other buds dormant or sleeping. And so you're going to have the axillary or lateral bud with a leaf. And as the apical bud is going to keep getting higher and higher and higher, eventually that dormancy may break. And that is going to be, that's going to allow that axillary or lateral bud to then begin to grow into a side branch. The side branch is going to be almost a mirror of the central stem where you're going to have a terminal bud, and as that grow and gives length to this branch, then it's going to also have a node with another lateral bud and a leaf, and it's going to continue on repeating another node with a lateral bud and a leaf. And so you have that portion of the plant, that area that is known as the node, and the area between the two nodes, as you can see here, is going to be the internode. The internode is going to be very important for you to know where it is, because if you were to make a cut right here below the node, then you're going to have the pure internode that does not have any lateral buds, and that is going to create a stub. In pruning, stubs or those areas of the stem that will no longer grow are not good. They're going to be unsightly, and eventually they will have an entryway for pathogen or diseases or other harmful things to the plant. So the internode will become those stubs that we'll see later on. And so you have some of those lateral branches that will grow, and eventually out of each of those lateral buds, they will grow as well. And that is how eventually a plant will get bushier or shrubbier or fuller, however you want to refer to it. So it's the lateral buds that will keep growing. And as we learn more about plants and train them, we'll be able to determine which area or where we prune so that we can guide some of the buds into growing in areas where we want to fill in a gap or a hole or something else. And then it's also important for us to understand that not all stems are going to grow up. There's going to be some lateral stems or stems that grow across into the ground. Some of those are going to be used as ground covers. Sometimes when the stem touches the ground, they will create new roots that will then kind of anchor them to the ground, and they will continue on to spread. It's also important for you to understand that plants have different types of armaments or things that are going to be harmful to you. So there's going to be modifications on some of the stems in what is known as thorns, and there may also be modifications of some of the leaves in what are known as spines. So from now on, be extra careful, especially as you are working with plants that you may have never worked with, because some of these are going to be hidden, and yes, they can definitely puncture you and make you bleed if you are not careful. And so those are going to be the main part of the stem. We have the apical or the terminal bud. We have the node that has a lateral bud and usually a leaf associated with it. And then we have the internode, and then we have the branch that is going to be exactly the same mirror as that. And then eventually at some point, special buds that will grow into flowers will be produced on mature plants. And those are just going to be the flowers that will later become the fruit. And so when we look at just our tomato plant here, we're just going to take this as a sample. So here we have exactly the same thing, just a little bit smaller, not as complicated. So we have the apical bud or the terminal bud right here. We also have the lateral bud here with the node, and then the internode, and that repeats, and then the leaf and the fruit and the stem. And so if we were to take that terminal bud and magnify it greatly, where we can see what's happening inside, we would see something like this. And this is going to occur in all the terminal buds, whether it be the one at the very top of the plant or the tip of the branch, the bud, the outermost buds will also have this. And so we have what is known as the apical meristem right below the very tip. The apical meristem is an area where there are specialized cells, embryonic cells which only job is to multiply, become more. And so what happens is that when the cells are generated, they are going to leave behind. And then as they are left behind, they're going to enter several areas. One of the areas is going to be a zone of elongation. So those new cells will then stretch. And when they stretch, they're going to push that apical meristem a little bit higher and a little bit higher, eventually reaching 200, 300, 400 feet for some larger trees. And then as they get left behind, eventually they enter another zone that is known as the zone of differentiation. And that is where they become part of the plant. If they happen to be in an area where the vascular system of the plant is to be formed, then they become part of the vascular system. If they happen to land in an area where a leaf is supposed to be, then they become part of the leaf or part of the skin or the bark of the tree or anything that is needed. And so through this process where those apical meristem cells keep multiplying, then they elongate, that is why it's going to give a plant its height. So the plants are going to get higher, 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 and higher. And then as you can see here, we have the axillary or the lateral buds that have been left behind, already formed. Those have their own apical meristem as well. So as they grow out into that branch, it will be repeating the same thing that is happening right here. And then here we see what is known as the leaf primordia, or these are the immature leaf that you can see associated with the two lateral buds here. And you see the same thing right here. And so this is a highly magnified photograph of the apical meristem, but it's important for you to understand how the plant is going to acquire some of the height, how the plants are going to grow. And so now looking at a different photograph, we see that many plants are going to have an active growth period and a dormant growth period. And so here we have the growth for a 3-year branch. And so whenever there's going to be some kind of dormancy, the apical meristem is going to be protected and you may see some kind of scar. So as you can see here, bud, scale scar. So that's going to be where the uh, stem stopped growing, it went through the winter, then it grew for another season, and then here it stopped growing, went through sleep in the winter, and now this is where it is right now. So you have some of the buds that are now beginning to grow, and we have now the growth for 3 years for a single branch. And this could be longer depending on the type of plants because many plants can grow way bigger than this in just one season. The lentil cells are going to be a special structure that will occur in woody plants. And those are going to be tiny holes or bumps that are going to be found on the stem. And those are going to allow for gas exchange. So they're going to allow for the plant to breathe because obviously it's going to have some woody and bark. And so it still needs to breathe. But we have exactly the same thing. We have the node, in this case, because the plant went dormant. We no longer see the leaf, but we see the scar where the leaf was attached. And then we see the bud right there. So that is the node with the leaf and the lateral bud. And it keeps going on and on and on. And so here's some of those examples in real plants where we have the apical at the tip, and then we have the laterals that already grew, and we have the apical that are dormant, so that's why they're protected. There's a lot of scales here, and those will eventually fall off as the plant begins to grow. And then you see the lenticels, and so this area where you have this leaf scar and the lateral bud that is already grew, that is the lateral shoot or the axillary bud, and then this entire area is the node. And so here's an even closer magnification. So the leaf bundle scars right there, that's where it stopped growing from the 2 years ago. This is the new growth, and then the tip is somewhere over here. But here you can see the lenticels, the tiny openings for those for the oxygen exchange or the gas exchange. And as you see different plants, it will be important for you to notice where the leaf was attached, because that could be important, especially when we begin to prune some of the trees that are dormant right now that will have no leaf. It's important for you to take a notice or begin to notice where the leaf was attached, because there will be a scar, and the scar will have a kind of area where the vascular connection of the plant was located. And so here's just some examples with that lateral bud above it. And here's another one, and there's another one, and there's the bud that it's dormant. So just begin to notice that. Another very important word that you need to know is the word suckers, as it refers to plants and or pruning. And those are going to be shoots that are going to come out of the stem. Many plants are going to be naturally induced to sucker. They'll do it out of nature. Other plants are going to do it as a response to some kind of trauma, as in the case with this image. You have a tree that was removed, but the roots are still alive, and the roots can generate some kind of bud below the ground, and those are going to grow into new shoots. Now, this is usually those are usually removed because their attachment is not going to be good. And if they are allowed to grow bigger, eventually they're going to be a problem. Not always, because sometimes if a sucker is growing in the right area where you want it to create a screen or in a desirable spot, then you can just train it, work with it, and that could become a desirable plant. But just be aware that any kind of shoot that comes from below the ground, from the roots, it's going to be referred to as a sucker in the plant world. Here we have a tree. This is a California redwood, and it's going to naturally sucker. In the wild, it does play an important role, because in the wild, it's going to shade the roots, and eventually it's going to create a small microclimate for it to be very happy. Obviously, here in a yard, it's not going to be playing the same role. But in this case, the image that you see here, they have made the suckers into a square. Not the best thing, but it's, I guess that's what it works for them. So those are the shoots that are coming from the ground. And next to it is one where they remove the suckers completely. So this would be more of what you're going to see out there when they simply allow that central stem to remain, and any of the other suckers or shoots that come from below the ground are then removed. And so now if we look at the leaf of the plant, the leaves are going to play a very important role. The first thing that you need to know is whether the plant has a simple or a compound leaf. Keeping in mind that this terminology may be new to some of you, you should now become familiar with it. A simple leaf is going to have two main parts. So it's going to have a petiole, that is going to be the stem, tiny stem that is attaching the leaf to the plant. And then it's going to have a blade. And associated with that will be the node with the bud. And so we have the petiole and the leaf blade, and that's going to be the green portion. This is going to be a simple leaf versus when we have a compound leaf. A compound leaf is going to sometimes branch a little. So we have the petiole, and then in the center, we're going to have something that is known as a rachis, or that middle stem. That will then have what is known as a leaflet. So the leaflet is going to be tiny leaf-like structures that are going to be found throughout the leaf. So we have the petiole, the rachis, sometimes it's going to be a terminal leaflet, but there's going to be leaflets throughout. And so we have here a simple compound leaf, or we have here a little more complex where there's even more branching. What's very important for you to know and understand is, once again, the leaf begins from where it attaches itself to the stem, and you have a node to the topmost area. So this entire unit here is one leaf. This entire unit here is one leaf with many leaflets. So the compound leaves will have leaflets, but they're going to be much bigger. And to the person that might not be trained with plants, each of the leaflets may look like a leaf, but in fact, it is one unit, the leaf. Whereas you have simple leaves that is just going to be simple, petiole and leaflet, and that's about it. Here's just some of the examples with real plants. So we have pears or eucalyptus versus mimosas and African tulip trees. So these are just the examples of the compound leaf versus a simple leaf. But it is very important for you to now begin to see this. The leaves will play a vital role, and that is going to be for carrying out photosynthesis. Plants are able to manufacture their own food. They're going to take very simple compounds. They're going to take water from the soil. They're going to take carbon dioxide from the air. And all of this inside the leaf, inside the green pigment, which is the chlorophyll, there's going to be a chemical process that is going to convert the raw material into glucose or sugar, which the plant will then use for fueling its growth and also for developing new bodies or new body parts and carrying out its biological function. As a waste product, the plant is going to then exude or excrete oxygen, or it's going to put it back in and use it again as well. But this is the building block. So plants do want to have as many leaves as they can, because the more leaves that they have and the more leaves that they have into the sunlight, the more energy and the more food that they're going to be able to manufacture. And this is something that you need to be aware of, because when you do any kind of pruning, you are going to be cutting leaves. It is inevitable. You're going to cut branches, you're going to cut stems, you're going to cut leaves. And it is not uncommon for plants to all of a sudden feel threatened because you've taken away a lot of the leaves. And as a response from being pruned, they're going to have a flush of new growth of leaves because they want to have a leaf surface so they can make more food. So be aware of this, because the more that you prune, you may be encouraging more leaves to come out, or just it's a response, emergency response. The plant just trying to survive. You taking away some of the food manufacturing surface. Also, the moment that you remove any kind of stem, the plants will store the energy that is made in the leaves on the stems. So by removing a lot of stems from a plant, once again, you're taking away its reserves, and the plant can go into an emergency or into a shock, and then it's just going to want to make some more food because it's going to feel happier like that, or safer. So the leaves will play a major role, photosynthesis, which is very important for the plant. So make sure that you remove some, but don't cut them unnecessarily, because you're putting more stress on a plant that is not really needed. The other thing that is going to be very important is the arrangement of the leaves on a plant. And so when we look at the leaves and the stem, you need to look at the nodes now. Now, when you look at a node, do you have just one single bud and one leaf? If that is the case, then you have what is known as an alternate leaf arrangement, because then below that, you have just one leaf and then a bud, and same thing below that. But when you have two leaves and two nodes on the same node, sorry, two leaves and two buds on the same node, then you have what is known as an opposite leaf arrangement, which means that there are going to be two buds, or the leaves are going to be opposite to each other. Here we have exactly that. We have one node, and then we have two leaves. And then here's just in a live plant, we have the bud and then one leaf. And then when you have more than two leaves, three or more, coming out of the same node with more than one bud, then that is known as a whorled leaf arrangement. It's very important for you to start noticing this because now you can use this to your advantage. Now, when you are trying to direct the growth of the plant, on a plant that has an opposite alternate leaf arrangement, you can select the bud that is pointing in the right direction or in the direction that you want to cover an area, and you can prune above that. Now, this will become the topmost bud, the lateral. Once it begins to grow, it's going to grow in the direction that you want it. And gradually, you can train plants to grow in whatever direction you want them to head towards. And in the opposite leaf arrangement, you have two lateral buds on each node. This is good because sometimes you might want to have a plant that becomes bushier or shrubbier or becomes fuller. And so a constant routine of tip pruning, which just means cutting the tips, will encourage the lateral buds to spread out. That's going to give you two on each node. And if you tip prune those, then you're going to get four, and you can increment the number of lateral buds and lateral branches, and that's going to make your plant a lot fuller. So now using the arrangement of the leaves and the location of the buds and which way they're facing is going to become very important as you are training and pruning the plants. And with conifers, we'll talk about them later in more detail. There will have some kind of needle or modification on leaves. So here's just a few examples of the conifers that you want to see, from our bald cypress to redwoods, photocarpus, down red cedars and pines, and even ginkgos and a few other things here. So these are just modified leaf coming from the conifers, but we'll have an entire seminar on those later on. And then if we look at the roots will have something very similar to the buds or the apical bud. So I mentioned the different zones. So at the tip of the root, the first thing there's going to be a cap. Uh, Growing through the soil, it's going to be very difficult. There's going to be glasses, sharp edges, rock. So there has to be a helmet that is going to protect the valuable uh, cells that are going to be dividing the apical meristem. And so here's the apical meristem from the root, and those are going to be the cells that are going to continue on dividing. And then as they're left behind, they go into this area of division. That's going to be the apical meristem. As they get left behind further, then they're going to the zone of elongation. That's where they're going to stretch, pushing the roots deeper as the above ground push the stem higher. And then eventually they're going to go into a zone of differentiation where they're going to then be part of whatever happens to be the need. It could be some root hairs for absorption. It could be the vascular system, or it could be just the dermis or the skin of the plant. So exactly the same thing, exactly the same zones you have inside the roots or the tips of the roots as you have on the tips of the stems. The other thing that is going to be very important is going to be the vascular system. So yes, plants do have veins. Yes, plants can bleed. So within the stem, there is going to be a vascular system that when you cut some of the plants, there may be some bleeding, there may be some sap. Eventually, that's going to heal, hopefully. But just be aware of that because the vascular system could potentially be something good for you to understand, and we'll talk about it later in a different seminar. So review the basic vocabulary. You can go back and look through this again, and let's get ready to do some pruning. Take care and have a great day.